Okay. Oh, and I've just seen someone from St Albans. Have to recognise that. Hi, Helen. I'm up the road in Redbourne, 3 miles from St Albans. So what's the latest with employee engagement? I thought that this is something that is worth covering because fundamentally engagement has been around for 20 plus years. I certainly remember when I was in-house. In fact, I worked for Siemens in-house for a number of years. I think Steve's on here who also did, and we did engagement surveys, and we was one of the first times we were doing engagement, and we were one of the smallest customers of Gallup. And that was when people were really starting to recognize that employee engagement actually had a correlation with the bottom line, whether we're talking about actual profitability, but all of the other things that it has an impact on. Now, it's been around for a number of years, but the world hasn't stood still. And I think the key is, because we had been focusing on engagement potentially as people professionals for a number of years, before the pandemic, engagement and well-being overall was rising. In fact, the research suggests that it was rising globally for nearly a decade. But along came the pandemic, and now at best they're stagnant. They made a bit of a tip back. The sort of things that you're hearing from people are people living for the weekend, maybe just working to live, that sort of things. And it says that in terms of the study, much fewer people are overall, and this is a global thing, engaged in their work. And that also means that people are not thriving. So it's bad news for both the employees and for the employer. Some of this information that I've taken to get the most up-to-date information, I did go back to Gallup, who's continued to do great surveys in this sort of area. Obviously, they make loads of money out of engagement surveys too, but they do global surveys. And I'm going to ask my colleague Caitlin just to drop in a link to their recent data, which might be useful to you, so you can download that yourself. So it'll be dropped into the chat. So let's have a look at what we're going to cover. I haven't even introduced myself. Thank you. You're all introducing yourselves. My name's Lucinda. Many of you will have come across me, I think, if you've been on here before, but if not, I have many years in corporate learning and development roles. I'm a chartered psychologist. My day job is founder and CEO of Actus. I host the HR Uprising podcast, which has got lots of topics relevant. So if you've not come across that, you might find interesting things here. And I'm also really interested in change and a bit of a netball fan too. Actus, just to let you know about this, I'll flag this up in case you don't know, it's about performance, talent and learning management. So that's what our solution is all about. And the key about it is doing it in an engaging way, because although we sell software, the absolute key is about, it's not what the software does, it's how it's used, which is going to drive employee engagement. And having a good performance management process can be key to engagement, but it all lies in the hands of our line managers. The other things that we'll do, I'm just going to flag up here, is we've got a 360 Now system, which I'll mention later. And also, if you're in the area of learning and development, we have got new dates coming up and new prices for our virtual training courses. So Change Superhero, Management Essentials, and Impact and Influence. So what are we going to focus on today? First of all, why is employee engagement particularly important now in this hybrid world and in this very volatile and uncertain world? What do we do to measure and actually, most importantly, affect it positively? The strategic drivers, employee engagement, and as always, some practical ideas as to what we might want to do around employee engagement. So going to our chat, if I was to ask you what you might define as employee engagement, I'm interested to see what your definitions are. Obviously, I have a Blue Peter, if anyone knows what Blue Peter is, so I have a version of definitions on my next slide. But how would you define engagement? What does it mean to you? Welcome, Helen. I'm seeing you get a new role in wellbeing and engagement. That's nice. Okay, let's have a look. So we've got, is this Gail who's just coming on the phone? Is that motivated employees using the personal agency working towards a shared purpose? That's a good term, personal agency. So using it, all about everything their wherewithal, they're about, their own sort of discretionary effort. That's the other term, isn't it? I think that would fit there. Sam's talking about how to involve the team. So that's actually about how to do it. this is interesting, employees who thrive, not just survive, totally. So that's when they're engaged, they're really, they are loving their work and hopefully having that balance. Aligning the team with the overall goal, people who'll feel great on a Sunday night, oh, that's a good one, John, when they're thinking about Monday morning as opposed to that slump. Maham is saying the involvement of employees in their organisation. Sean says staff who are proud of what they do, the service they deliver, and how to make a difference. John says engagement involves involvement and being helpful to solve the task at hand. Helen's saying everyone's happy and driven to succeed, interaction and involvement. And Francis is talking about really listening to employees and involving them in the company goals. That's really interesting because actually what's come out of those statements here, and this isn't what I've got on my other slide, but the point about engagement is it's actually an outcome, so we can feel engaged. It's a process where we are engaging or involving others. And I think it's a sort of it's a noun almost as well. It's something that we measure in terms of things. So it's interesting. It has a number of different terms. Now, if we're going to, all of which are relevant, and I think that's come through from the definitions you guys have put in there. Now, in terms of the definitions, some more formal definitions in the context of sort of HR, we've got things which is about personal role engagement, which is saying our emotional, cognitive and physical connection to our work. So the extent to which we really feel attached and connected with the work that we do on a day-to-day basis. Another term here is work engagement, and that's vigor, so levels of energy, dedication and absorption in work activity. And the classic, which I remember being the Gallup one, which is the willingness to go the extra mile for the company, which is that extra agency. So there's definitely something about energy, connection, attachment to our work and also to our organisation, and how we get people there is about involving them, connecting with vision, etc., etc. So I thought no one's going to know the answer to this. This is anonymous because I don't know what school you're going to say. But here I've got a question for you. So we've got, I don't know, 30 odd people on this call. How engaged do you feel personally? I've hopefully launched the poll so you can see, and let's see truthfully how you guys are. I mean, are you all pretty engaged because you're actually going out of your way to develop yourselves and take part in a webinar today, or not? That'd be the interesting thing. So let's see, how engaged do you feel currently? Okay, I've got nearly 70% participation, so I'll just go and count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, nearly at 90%. Anyone else want to choose? Maybe you can't if you're on certain devices. Let me end and share. So yeah, I'd say we've got a pretty engaged group here, which again, it is interesting. When we run webinars during the pandemic, we had loads of people attending. And I think actually now, perhaps we're so used to being online, the sort of webinar attendance ebbs and flows. But so the group here, you're all moderately engaged in terms of that. So some of you are extremely engaged or slightly engaged. So we've got a normal distribution, but it's more on the engaged side. And when we look at the stats later, that's interesting because we'll compare how you are compared to the average worker globally based on the stats. And if I just throw one more poll up with you here. So follow-on poll. That's how you are now. Let's see how engaged you feel relative to pre-pandemic working. So just to get a feel for, would you say you are less engaged than you were before the pandemic, the same or more engaged? And feel free to put any comments as to if there's context that you want to share. So what might make you more or less engaged since the pandemic? Okay, let's give you a couple more seconds. We've got 56%, nearly 65%. So Helen's saying she feels closer to her work colleagues. Is that because of what you had to go through together? It's almost that siege mentality that we've had going through things. Whereas Steve's saying actually it doesn't make too much difference because he's been a home worker for some time. Does anyone else want to just to vote? And I'll share that, and then I'll have a little look at the things. Yes, you feel closer because of what you've been through. I think that's a very interesting one, that engagement scores will probably relate to how well people felt they were treated through the pandemic. That's I can't prove that. So most of you are the same, few higher and lower there. But if you really felt connected with people, you had to really get close to people in order to kind of deal with it. And actually, this group of people is quite a high number of people professionals on here who had an awful lot of things to do. Then actually, that may well make you feel, you know, closer in terms of a sense of belonging, which fits within engagement. Laura actually says it. So that's an interesting one too, isn't it? Because some of us really find the ability to if we enjoy our job, to work remotely more and not have to just mess around with the commute, more engaging if you're comfortable with your work. The risk is, of course, those who are missing people or aren't so comfortable with their work, whether that makes them have less of a sense of belonging or not. So yeah, Laura's saying she likes the working from home, so that potentially makes you more engaged. Certainly people, flexibility and freedom was something that has always been a component in engagement. And now if people had it taken away, I think that would be an active disengagement, whereas before they had to kind of go with whatever the predominant culture was within that organisation. Whatever our views on engagement or wherever we are, there is no doubt, however, that engagement is a predictor of job performance. So we do want to maximise engagement with organisations. And I said earlier, I was going to see whether or not we are a representative group in terms of our personal engagement. And I will look at that. But this is why it's a predictor of job performance. So when Gallup were comparing top and bottom quartile business units and teams, the differences that you saw in terms of business outcome were these. So your top versus your bottom quartile in an organisation in terms of engagement scores, 81% more absenteeism. So massive indicator, risk factor if people are absent, that they're disengaged. Higher turnover. And that, of course, is where that's going to in itself make a difference in cost, isn't it? Because recruitment, it's not just the cost of recruiting, it's the covering for people, it's the getting people up to speed and the pressure it puts on other team members when we've got fewer people. So if you've got absenteeism and turnover, that's a pretty strong indicator that there's an issue going on with engagement. Safety incidents, well, that could be a huge problem. 41% difference in quality of work, 18% difference in sales, which is interesting, isn't it? And 23% difference in profitability. So it's massive in terms of the potential impact. And if any of you on here are in a position where you're trying to persuade your organisation to invest in something that might positively impact engagement, I would suggest that this data is pretty important, because it's often really hard when you're a people professional to get the FD to see a value in spending money on whether it's management development or systems or whatever. But helping them see the link between that sort of thing and engagement and the risk of not, the difference in cost, that makes quite a difference. The damning statement there is that Gallup says only 15% of employees worldwide are engaged. So that would put people on this call certainly in the top, you know, sorry, in the other side of this. So in that 15%, potentially 15-20% of people that you're actively engaged, a lot of others are not so. And that's something for us to be really aware of, because we might be engaged with what we do, but that doesn't mean that the people that we're supporting in our organisations are equally engaged. So thinking about the fact of engagement, wondering what it is that actually drives engagement, I have got a list of the typical things that go, but again, what do you think drives engagement for you personally? So for example, Laura has said working from home. So clearly maybe something about freedom, flexibility of workplace is quite important to you. Feeling a sense of belonging, Helen, in terms of working with your colleagues, that might be a driver of engagement from what you're saying. What do others think? What makes you feel more or less engaged as an individual? Yeah, autonomy. That's a good one, Francis. Being able to make decisions and have an impact in my role. So feeling that you're autonomous, and also potentially, I guess, your views or your decisions are valued and able to do that. And Jonathan said the same thing, having an impact through my work. So that's slightly different, isn't it? That's about maybe seeing a connection between what you're doing and the overall purpose. I don't know which organisation you work for, Jonathan. you've got the surname Trussell. Let's imagine it's Trussell Trust, which I don't think, I'm assuming it isn't, but I mean, being able to see an impact of something in terms of poverty or food, if because Trussell's the food bank charity, isn't it? So being able to say something, if you are connected with the purpose of your organization, being able to see that what you're doing is making a difference. Steve likes to is engaging if he feels actually challenged by the job he's doing, so it's not mundane and boring. Autonomy and freedom, trust, flexibility, and autonomy is coming through. Feeling heard, Mohammed saying, and being able to influence things, recognized and heard. Some real patterns, isn't it? Working with an honest and friendly team, having flexibility and not being micromanaged, so trust. And that's another interesting one where you see in terms of us having been trusted to work remotely for so long, and then there's certain organizations that are trying to force people back into the office 4 or 5 days a week when they don't want to go. That has a message that says they're not trusted, because it's hard to see what the value is if that's in that situation, and that is disengaging. So organizations have got to be really careful not to work against engagement. Helen, you're right, some of it is your innate personality, and you're saying you get engagement, you know you're making a difference. Same, then I think that's about values. So it's about something where your role or what you're doing you feel supports your values and feel part of something driving positive change. My kind of person there, Helen, absolutely. So those are all your words in those, whether or not these reflect in here. But I've got drivers of engagement in terms of the official definitions here. Actually, none of you mentioned manager there. And that's an interesting one, actually, as to, I guess, what you're saying is if you feel recognised and heard, that would be, or you don't, that's down to your line manager, isn't it? Not being micromanaged. That's about having a line manager. So a lot of it's inferred from what you're saying. Autonomy came up again. So if you've got a manager that's overly directive and controlling, takes away your autonomy. So these are drivers of engagement as well in terms of these. So manager, the role of the line manager is massive, absolutely massive, and we'll talk more about that. Clarity of role and alignment with strategic purpose. Well, a number of you talked about that in terms of alignment, feeling you're making a difference and a connection. In terms of behaviours of managers, ongoing conversations with quality, timely feedback. No one actually said that there, but that is something that comes out regularly. Trust, autonomy and empowerment. Well, I think you said that pretty much word for word. No one mentioned this, opportunities to learn and grow in the organisation. Our level of fit, this is about belonging, and I think a little bit of that did where you were talking about feeling part of a change, feeling part of a positive team, feeling part of making a change, those sort of things. Strength-based conversations, and then psychological states, and that's where Helen was saying at the end, some of it's down to your innate personality. Some people are more likely to feel autonomous because they've got a greater sense of self-efficacy, which basically means they feel that they can do things, they feel in control, they feel they're empowered. Resilience, people who have who are more resilient, perhaps less anxious, are more likely to be able to get engaged, having the confidence to get on with things. So there are some natural elements, and I think this is where engagement and well-being overlap into each other. The other thing I think that's coming out of this is that the suggestions that have come in the chat, a lot of those are to do with you and being engaged yourself, I think, and from quite an engaged group of people. A number of these suggestions are about how we can drive engagement, so as in get engagement to take place, and a lot of it would be through line managers. So I've looked at having a supportive line manager, feedback, opportunities to learn and grow, trust, autonomy and empowerment. And absence of these is going to make people less engaged, but putting them in positively is a route to engagement, and it's perhaps something that we can practically do, or at least educate line managers to practically do. Now I'm talking, I've got another, in terms of these ones, got one more poll. I think this is my last poll, might not be. Let me just see, which do you think of those are the most, is the most option? I've put it, you can choose more than one. Okay, so choose your top 2 or 3. Which do you think are the most important drivers of engagement in your experience? So you can thinking for yourself or in terms of working with others. So it's quite interesting actually, because the results on these are shifting a little bit since when we've done this sort of thing pre-pandemic. It is, isn't it, hard to choose? Not all of them are good, right? In the absence of any of that, all of them do make sense. That's a strengths-based conversation, and perhaps that one's hard to know what we're talking about there. There's evidence that if you feel that you're working in line with your strengths, or your strengths are being fully utilized in your role, then people are more engaged. It's a bit about being the right fit in the right job that fits you as well, that you feel like you're playing to your strengths. And perhaps that's my wording may not be so great there. Has it got personal states on as well? Yes, I agree, Mohan. They're not seems more important, but it's always interesting to get a little bit of a vote on these, for you to see how your views compare with others. So let's share this. Everyone's had a chance to participate, and the results for this group of people. So absolutely key is trust, autonomy and empowerment is a whacking 76% up there in terms of one of the most important ones to everybody. Then although we hadn't really talked about supportive management previously, obviously having a supportive manager is really important in terms of what they do. In terms of managers, because it's not necessarily feedback or strength-based conversations coming through, anything you want to comment about what makes a difference with a supportive manager or not? What does great management look like now? Has that changed? Is it about regular feedback, or is it about being just standing back so you feel you've got that trust? Interesting in that. Opportunity to learn and grows up there. So that's interesting, isn't it? We'll grab a screenshot of that because it's always useful to see how what our views are and how they compare with others. So moving forwards, the reason that I keep referring to line manager, and actually your voting there does align with that, is that Gallup says that the line manager, the approach of the line manager accounts for 70% of the variance in team engagement. And previously this is talking about old style management and more future management, although I have to say this old and future has been the future for an awfully long time. It's less about sort of job and sort of measures, if you like. It's more about purpose. So this whole thing about feeling that the work you're doing has purpose and is meaningful, focusing on your development and your growth, being more of a coach as opposed to being directive. So coaching style conversations, regular conversations, not just a once a year appraisal, focusing on strengths rather than development gaps. So that's that strengths-based conversation. It's a school of thought to say, actually, we get more out of people by focusing on what their strengths are and taking them to a higher level than we do just trying to get everybody to be a basic level by filling their gaps. And it's not just about a job now, it is really about life. And because we are, excuse me, particularly working at home, we are maybe picking the kids up from school, still working around everything. We are weaving our life and our work together, which actually can be incredibly fulfilling in terms of the flexibility, but it does require understanding from line managers and actually a great deal of clarity about what's important. And I think that's one of the hardest things in that sort of flexible workspace, keeping that real clarity about how to be productive. And I'm going to do a podcast on that, a podcast probably, and a webinar on that in January, and can work on some extra data around that. The challenge, I think, of this my life thing and the way we're working remotely is, though, the downside possibly of remote working is not everybody has the natural ability to prioritize, to understand what their priorities are and understand how to say no to things. So people can find that the boundaries shift. So people are either maybe not feeling productive because they're working on the wrong things, or maybe feel like they're working all the time. And then maybe stress from work is carrying over into home because they might be working in their bedroom or however it is, even though they don't want to commute. There's still real sort of grey areas in terms of those boundaries between home and work. And that's a real issue because if we want people to be engaged, they can't be burnt out, which is why we still need to keep this focus on employee well-being and helping people to manage this. Stress levels, the Gallup survey showed that stress levels were massively higher. And when they did the survey, said that people are far more stressed than they were in 2020, which was the last time they'd done the survey, and 44% of people had a huge amount of daily stress in the previous day to that being surveyed. So there's a lot there to be aware of in terms of engagement. If we are helping people to be engaged, they're enjoying their job, they feel they've got purpose, they feel they've got trust and autonomy, then they're less likely to be at risk of burnout. And so it's both of those things are equally important, and being able to spot these things. So our final sort of slide on what can we do practically, and love to hear from you in the chat if there's anything that you've been doing around engagement that you want to do, have done, you suggest that would be successful around engagement. These are things that we've looked at, and sort of practical suggestions. I'll explain them, and they're building on what we would typically have done around this. So one of the areas I think is about making sure that if people are going to continue to work remotely, which most people want to keep that freedom, then encourage ways of creating or recreating intentional connections, because it can be really easy not to talk to people then in terms of silos. If you join a new organization, you're not bumping into people. So working out routes in which there can be intentional connections. So that might be having forums remotely or face-to-face where people collaborate on project groups, on similar interests, but actively encouraging and almost targeting relationship building and collaboration. And the point of this is to make sure that people feel a sense of belonging in the organization, because that's so key for us to, if we think about, you can be engaged in your job but still not be engaged in your organization, and from a business point of view you kind of want both. So helping that people feel that they are engaged in that company as well, in your company. I'll read through. John's put loads of, I don't know, did you type that quickly or did you cut and paste that, John? That was super speedy. The other thing is make sure that managers and teams are getting clarity about what's important without affecting autonomy. And actually, this is how you avoid micromanagement. In a remote environment, it's really easy for priorities to shift, and those conversations may not have been picked up. So whereas previously you might have been sitting around the same area and you go, oh, well, by the way, we need to now prioritize X as opposed to Y. Somehow things can change, but not everybody knows that that's the case. So they're happily working towards a goal that they thought was the priority, and they're putting all their focus and time on that, but actually it's not the right way. So making sure that there's a frequency of communication about what the priorities are, so that people are able to be fully productive without affecting their autonomy. So it's not micromanagement, but just keeping people focused on what the proper priorities are. Continue to demonstrate trust, take away that trust. Forcing people to come in because you want to just see them have presenteeism is, in my opinion, a really backward step. Make sure people are recognised, so the recognition and the visibility of that, and just encourage work-life balance and blending and individual well-being. We're going into winter again. I would have been saying this 2 years ago during the pandemic. Encourage people to get away from their desk at lunchtime, to get some daylight, to walk the dog, whatever that might be, to even go to the gym, get people to deliver their outputs. But there's no point in just going back to going, right, 9 to 5, you've got to be glued to a desk of presenteeism. Actually, well-being is about people exercising, eating well, nutrition, not being overly stressed, and then being productive. So continuing to encourage that kind of behavior. And a lot of that's about a line manager encouraging that. Think about what you can use. Using surveys, tools like surveys and 360 feedback can be really useful when everyone is remote. Now, I think engagement surveys are a double-edged sword, because one of the risks of doing an engagement survey is doing a survey and then doing nothing about it. So if you're going to do a survey, you need to do something with it. But that's why little surveys and asking where people are, getting a temperature check, putting some activities in place, or feeding back on what that survey is and doing something about it, and then surveying is valuable. If you're never seen to do anything with your survey results, then the risk is that people won't fill them out. 360 feedback is another form of survey, and that can be really useful in a remote environment for people to get better awareness of how they are interacting with others, how they're collaborating. So you could pick certain roles. It doesn't have to be managers. We use term 360 because it's about being getting feedback from above, the side and below, but it could be customers, any stakeholders, and you could choose what the behaviours are that are important in your organisation and get people to ask others to comment on whether they're demonstrating on them. So that, when we're all working in silos, could be a really powerful tool to increase people's self-awareness. It also factors as a development opportunity, and that's engaging in its own right. And of course, ask people what they want. If they want development and growth, find out what they need. And it may well be that working remotely that they could do a course. People don't have to go away for weeks on end to go on training courses anymore, much as those have been lots of fun. But there are opportunities for development and growth virtually. It doesn't have to cost huge amounts of money, and it can be woven in to the business day as well, so with virtual training and things like that. So those are some of the practical applications that we recommend and people we've worked with have done well. I'm looking at what John's saying here. Anyone else got any other ones? John, absolutely recognising effort, not just success. Building psychological safety. So all of those are things about behaviours. Psychological safety is a subject in its own right, and that is about making sure that your team feels safe to make mistakes. There is not a blame culture. So it's all about helping people to do these things. I won't go through all of John's there. I think he could probably speak at length on those. So thank you for the thoughts that you've got there. CSR, social responsibility. I forgot what the C is. Someone will tell me in a minute. And that's something that, Laura, it varies. It gets on, and some people think that's more important than others. Can someone tell me what C stands for in CSR? So keep on suggesting any other suggestions that you've got. If anyone's got any questions in the chat that you want to pop in, please also put those corporate social responsibility. Thank you. Put your questions in the chat, and I will, just as we're going through this, pop some other things like just telling you what's coming next and things like that. And this will all be here. So let me keep an eye on what you've got to do. If you've got any questions, I think I might have one more poll if anyone wants to know anything or wants us to follow up. Yeah, as ever, we always sort of say if there's anything you want to know about from us or want to hear any more, you can just pop on there if you'd like us to get in touch. But what's coming up, we've got a whole plethora of additional things coming up. We're reinstating the HR Uprising Coffee Club, which is just a facilitated hour where you'll network with other people. We jump on a Zoom, I put you into small groups, and you get to talk with colleagues, either in the same sort of industry or different, whichever you like, but on relevant topics. So the 1st of November, we're going to do the cost of living. When we get great information out of this, actually also we write it up and share it so that you can benefit from the findings. I've got a range of additional webinars coming up, and say you can read these for yourself, but there's 3 coffee clubs coming up before Christmas, so you might want to join one of those. Talking about remote training, we've got management training, Change Superhero, and Impact and Influence, which is more of a sort of aimed at people newer into the workplace who aren't necessarily line managers. So all of those kicking off in the new year. So just letting you know those dates. We just established those dates. Cameron's, oh, well done, Caitlin. Caitlin's popped. If you are interested in joining the coffee club on 1st of November, you can just sign up on the Eventbrite link there. And another thing to let you know about, sorry, we have just done our calendar. That's why there's so many things to tell you about. 360, if you want to know more about 360, as I said, this can really be a useful engagement tool. It's not a survey in this, it's not as an engagement survey, although you can use it for that. Really good for personal development. And obviously we can be done on a personalised basis. If you want to know more about that, we're going to do a discovery session on this because not everybody knows about it. That's going to be on the 10th of November at 12:30. So we'll explain what 360 is if we don't know, also how you might run 360 if you're interested in it. And of course, we do have a product, so we can tell you more about that if that's something you want to know more about. Okay, so these are useful resources. We'll send all of these things out to you so you can click on all the links live. But if there's any other questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat, or what I'll do is I'll close the webinar down, I'll stop the recording, and if anyone wants to unmute or wants to have a conversation about anything, I'll hang on for a few minutes as well.